Cette guerre a été vendue aux Américains à coups de mensonges et de mystification.
La campagne de propagande pour vendre cette guerre, pour moi, ce fut une véritable imposture.
Moi, je n'excluais pas du tout le risque et une manipulation.
Ce fut une vaste fraude, pas une erreur, mais une fraude.
Moi, je n'excluais
Well,
pas
I
du tout le
wouldn't
risque
rule
et
out
une
a manipulation.
This was fraud, and I can't say that often enough. No mistake, fraud.
September 11th. In the ruins of New York, America vows to defeat terrorism, but this promise is quickly betrayed. George Bush changes enemies. Osama bin Laden is replaced by Saddam Hussein. This about-face is the fruit of an extraordinary manipulation, with catastrophic consequences for the world. Everything begins less than 6 hours after the attack. At the Pentagon, which was also struck, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld scans the rubble and issues his instructions. Stephen Cambone, one of his advisors, takes notes. Rumsfeld's intentions are unequivocal. The evening of that tragic day, President Bush addresses America and the world.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
This essential detail was inspired by a key figure in this adventure, Richard Pearl. On the afternoon of 9/11, the Pentagon advisor places a call to the president's speechwriter.
I was on the telephone with David Frum, and I said to David on the afternoon of 9/11, whatever else the president says, he should say that we will hold responsible the states that support terrorism.
It is a strategic break from the more modest policies of Bush's predecessors.
I believe it represented a recognition that we would never succeed against the terrorists if we went after them one at a time. And as long as governments were facilitating the organization, training, equipping, financing of terrorist organizations, we were never going to get it under control.
An ambitious program for all-out war, the stated goal of a group to which Richard Pearl belongs, the neoconservatives. Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith. These are the advisors who have Bush's ear. Joe Wilson, a career diplomat, witnessed their rise.
They came into office with the Republican Party, and in particular with the staffing done by the Vice President in his office and the Secretary of Defense in his office.
The neoconservatives, they have ties to the world of oil, to the defense industry. They are ideologues, champions of American hegemony in the world. Saddam Hussein, an unpredictable provocateur, is their bête noire.
On the evening of 9/11, the president's saying, well, maybe we'll be going after Iraq now. And somebody said, well, that would be against international law. The president responded, I don't care, we're going to kick some ass.
2 days after the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were attacked, the president was at Camp David with his senior officials, and Mr. Wolfowitz was telling the president, the Iraq and Saddam Hussein is the real problem.
It took the neoconservatives only 48 hours to prevail, change the regime in Baghdad, subjugate Iraq, a simpler objective than that of destroying the nebulous terrorist. September 19th. Those in support of eliminating Saddam Hussein meet at the Ministry of Defense, the Pentagon.
They all began asking questions about how long can we continue this policy aimed at keeping Saddam under control. And the conclusion they came to was not much longer.
An Iraqi takes part in this first council of war, Ahmed Chalabi, sworn enemy of Saddam Hussein. Chalabi has lived in exile for years and will play a significant role in this story, but more on that later. The day after the secret meeting at the Pentagon, President Bush addresses Congress. It is a historic moment. The nation is united by patriotism. Bush names the culprits: Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them.
Not a word about Iraq, but he warns.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there.
Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister and guest of honor, applauds. It signifies an unwavering alliance between Washington and London. The Taliban are quickly driven out of Kabul, and Al-Qaeda is dispersed. Osama bin Laden disappears. In Washington, Bush appears eager to move on to another war.
I stand by those words. Afghanistan is still just the beginning. If anybody harbors a terrorist, they're a terrorist. If they fund a terrorist, they're a terrorist. If they house terrorists, they're terrorists. I mean, I can't make it any more clearly to other nations around the world. If they develop weapons of mass destruction that will be used to terrorize nations, they will be held accountable.
The president has barely finished his speech when Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld meets with General Tommy Franks at Central Command in Tampa, Florida. Franks controls a massive area from Africa to Asia and leads the war in Afghanistan. But Rumsfeld has something else in mind: Iraq. He orders General Franks to prepare a plan of attack. Iraq, an easy target. Since its invasion of Kuwait and stinging defeat in 1991, the country has been under international administration. Despite the drubbing and the terrible sanctions that are decimating his people, Saddam has remained in power. In 1998, he even drove out UN inspectors sent to disarm him. For the neoconservatives, he is the devil.
Saddam was a dangerous man. Dangerous first to his own citizens and dangerous to the rest of the world.
Joe Wilson knows Iraq well. In 1991 in Baghdad, he was the last American diplomat to meet with Saddam Hussein.
Saddam was hemmed in. He was not a threat. He had been turned from a major regional power into a third-rate dictator.
Just over 100 days after the attacks of 9/11, America needs revenge. The neoconservatives want to seize the opportunity. Richard Pearl publishes a veritable declaration of war.
The United States must strike at Saddam Hussein.
The same day, Franks visits Bush at his ranch in Texas. In front of journalists, the two men speak of the successes against the Taliban.
In Afghanistan, well, Taliban gone, the country's secure, the country's stable.
We will destroy the Al-Qaeda terrorist network inside Afghanistan. It will take as long as it takes.
Thank you all.
Thanks for all the time.
But in private, Bush confirms to Franks the order to attack Iraq. This change in priority worries the general, who on February 19, 2002, confides in Bob Graham, Florida senator and chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
After a briefing which was quite upbeat, the progress that was being made, the general asked me to meet privately in his office. And the first thing he said was, "We're no longer fighting a war in Afghanistan." I was stunned by that, and I asked him, what did he mean? And he said that some of the important personnel, such as special operations units, were being moved from Afghanistan to get ready for a war in Iraq.
Bush's decision is fraught with consequences. The fight against terrorism is put on the back burner in favor of a conventional war in the most unstable region in the world. At the start of 2002, the military machine is set in motion. All that remains is to convince public opinion of the need to go to war with a country that seems far removed from the tragedy that struck America. Andrew Bacevich, former Army colonel and professor of military history.
Having made that decision to go to war, the political necessity was to sell the war to the American people.
They had prepared a significant propaganda operation to sell the war at a time when the press was very receptive to whatever the administration might be saying in its efforts to defend the United States against yet another attack.
And weapons of mass destruction seemed, to people on the inside, to offer the best mechanism to complete this selling job.
WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear. For months, this deadly arsenal will be at the heart of the Iraqi manipulation. The stakes in a formidable power struggle between war's supporters and its opponents.
I was listening to briefings, detailed, top-secret briefings from the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and other intelligence organizations. And they all believed very strongly that Saddam had multiple programs to develop weapons of mass destruction.
In reality, that harmonious unanimity does not exist. For years, American intelligence has been monitoring Iraq and has found nothing.
We spend billions, literally billions of dollars a year with what we call national technical means, which everyone knows are satellites, and they not only take images, but they have all kinds of other sensor data on that thing, okay? And guess what? Not one WMD site was found in Iraq since about 1991.
The giant of electronic espionage, the NSA, the National Security Agency, remains empty-handed. William Binney, former technical director at the NSA, was among those scrutinizing Iraq.
There was no information collected by NSA that indicated that he continued his weapons of mass destruction program, or even that he had weapons of mass destruction.
This is no surprise. Saddam Hussein's arsenal had been destroyed after the Gulf War. Before 9/11, American senior officials publicly stated otherwise.
He has not developed any significant capability with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He is unable to project conventional power against his neighbors.
We are able to keep arms from him. His military forces have not been rebuilt.
Once the dictator's fate is decided, the official tone has to change, and Washington portrays Saddam Hussein as a terrifying threat.
This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
But no terrorist state poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people and the stability of the world than the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
WMDs whose existence will have to be proven. To help them, the neoconservatives turned to Ahmed Chalabi in 1992, together with other opponents of Saddam Hussein in exile. He formed the INC, the Iraqi National Congress.
all of them had a common interest in being ex-exiles, in that they wanted to take over the government and understood that the way they were going to do that was by following a U.S. Army which was dispensing with the current government and with Saddam Hussein.
Overlooked by Bill Clinton, Chalabi allied himself with the Democratic president's worst enemies.
The INC managed to develop clear and significant strategic relations with people among the neocons and in the Republican Party at large, and with some Democrats also, to get support for America to do something about Saddam.
In January 2001, luck finally smiled on the Iraqi exiles.
So when President Bush came to power, all those people who were advocating, supporting us, came to power with him.
After 9/11, the collusion between Iraqi exiles and neoconservatives becomes cooperation.
The American administration, so they specifically asked us to see if we can introduce them to people who can provide information on WMDs.
Chalabi complies enthusiastically. He introduces the Americans to Iraqi defectors, endless sources of revelations about Saddam Hussein's deadly arsenal.
The people in Chalabi's group wanted to get rid of Saddam, so they were looking and searching and trying to come up with things that would help justify to us what our people wanted to hear. That is, we wanted to hear something about weapons of mass destruction so we could justify us going to war with them.
A talented manipulator, Chalabi also introduces his defectors to the press, and through their provocative headlines, the journalists lend credibility to all the allegations against Baghdad. This brainwashing machine divides Washington.
It was clear that from the very beginning that major institutions in the United States, such as the CIA and a large part of the State Department, were opposed to this. They had no confidence in us. They kept criticizing us. They kept calling us exaggerators, liars.
Despite everything, the Pentagon refuses to question the revelations made by the exiles.
The idea that Chalabi had information that he knew to be false and he presented it knowing it to be false has never been established in any of the inquiries, and there have been many official inquiries into the activities, the intelligence activities before the war.
But the skeptics must be countered. And to give credence to the Iraqi exiles, the hawks at the Pentagon create a parallel service, the Office of Special Plans, an initiative by Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith.
The Office of Special Plans, well, this was quite a monstrosity. They were set up as an alternative CIA.
The CIA gathers its information from a multitude of sources. In general, its analysts check them before submitting their conclusions to the politicians. But the Office of Special Plans short-circuits this process, a first in the history of American intelligence. In the end, Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld obtain the answers they need. George Tenet, director of the CIA, grudgingly supports the information before Congress.
At one of those hearings, the director of the CIA, George Tenet, brought with him 3 white folders were materials about the some 550 sites in Iraq where allegedly there were weapons of mass destruction. I asked Tenet, where did we get all this information? And the answer is, we got it from the exiles. Who did we, the United States of America, have on the ground to see if in fact what was said in these exile-provided information packets was accurate? And the answer was 0.
The machinery of lies runs at full throttle for months. The exiles and the Pentagon collaborate and transform mere allegations into official credo.
The collective effort by all those groups involved became a fabrication that became the policy of the United States, and it was used to justify a war.
A fruitful cooperation that is repeated in friendly nations. In Rome, a dossier from the Italian Military Secret Service, SISMI, arrives at the American embassy. It alludes to a secret sale of uranium to Iraq by Niger. Not to be outdone, the German Secret Service offers its support as well. It supplies the Americans with revelations made by an Iraqi defector, codenamed Curveball. He claims Baghdad is making biological weapons in its mobile laboratories.
Leadership up to date as the war to liberate Iraq and to remove the weapons of
For Bush, a crucial barrier remains to be crossed before he can go to war: Congress. In the galaxy of American power, it plays a central role. The president must ask Congress for the green light before launching the country into a military adventure.
In August and September, the drumbeats of war in Iraq started to get louder and louder, and there were indications that the president would soon be calling on Congress for an authorization of war against Iraq.
A mere formality, as Bush holds the majority. But Bob Graham will try to stop this mad race to war.
And one of the questions was, we'd like to review the national intelligence estimate on possible war with Iraq. And the answer was, there isn't a national intelligence estimate.
What Graham is asking for is the most secret document in American espionage, an estimate of what every intelligence agency knows about a particular threat.
To be told that here we're about to go to war and no national intelligence estimate has been done was astounding, and we asked that it be done.
What happened was they kept their heads way down, you know. They didn't want to do an estimate on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq because the honest answer was there aren't any.
In London, Blair comes to the aid of his friend Bush and publishes a dossier, in quotation marks, on the Iraqi weapons.
The intelligence picture they paint is one accumulated.
They can be deployed within 45 minutes, and Iraq is seeking uranium from Africa to develop an atomic bomb. But in Congress, Graham is not convinced. He presses on. He wants proof.
The agency, particularly the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, was very reluctant and said, we don't have time to do this. I said, we don't have time to know everything we need to know before we commit U.S. troops to combat.
So Tenet goes back to the White House and he says, looks like the jig is up. We're going to have to do an estimate. And the White House says, okay, Mr. Tenet, two things. Number one, you have to do it in 1.5 weeks. Usually an estimate takes 3 or 4 months. And number two, it's got to come out exactly as Vice President Dick Cheney said it was.
Tenet will once again yield to the president's orders. Bob Kerrey, senator, former Navy SEAL, was at the heart of the intelligence world.
Well, look, I think it's a fair accusation to say that both President Bush and Vice President Cheney put pressure on the intelligence community to reach a conclusion that they had already reached.
Vice President Cheney at one time went down and sat in CIA, sat down in a chair next to the analyst looking at the data saying, what do you have on weapons of mass destruction? Well, that kind of puts the pressure on the intelligence agency to come up with something.
In early October 2002, in the U.S. Congress, a resolution authorizing the war is put to the vote. The CIA finally presents its estimate on Iraq. Classified as top secret, it is not until 2015 that the estimate is made available to the public. It's an austere text, 95 pages long, that dissects Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction program. Most notably, however, the estimate is exceedingly cautious, citing doubts and conflicting opinions coming from the core of the intelligence community. To keep these doubts from being taken into account, the White House simultaneously publishes a shortened version of the estimate on Iraq. 25 pages, embellished with color photographs, maps, an exceptional propaganda tool.
They had a very clever, sanitized version of the estimate, which if a sentence said, we think it possible that Saddam Hussein had this, then they take out the possible.
Through its headlines, this version makes official the allegations that have been circulating for months. Baghdad has chemical and biological weapons, as well as missiles. Saddam could get his hands on a nuclear weapon within a year.
The sales campaign that took place, I would characterize as aggressive deception.
There's no question that the headlines leave a different impression of what's in the document itself. The October 2002 NIE is not conclusive.
No matter. It is the headlines that will sway Congress. Bob Graham knows this. He votes against the resolution to go to war.
By taking that action, according to our own intelligence reports, and I will tell you, friends, that, and I would encourage you to read the classified intelligence reports, which are much sharper than what is available in the classified form, we are going to be increasing the threat level against the people of the United States. If you reject that, the American people are not going to be an additional threat, then frankly, my friends, to use a blunt term, the blood's going to be on your hands.
I found the document to be very unpersuasive, and it was a significant part of my ultimate decision to vote against the war in Iraq.
October 10th, 2002, Congress approves the war. The world is plunged into instability for a long time to come. The swindle is a success. The war against Iraq can begin. American elected officials bear the immense responsibility of having allowed lies to dictate their decision for reasons that were, in the end, very political.
This vote was going to be taken in October of 2002, just a month before the November election. So there were a lot of people who felt that from a political standpoint, they didn't really want to know too much because they wanted to be able to tell their constituents, this is what the president said was the right thing. I accepted his judgment.
The vote by Congress is a resounding victory for the neoconservatives and Ahmed Chalabi's exiles, but it leaves the proponents of peace with a bitter taste in their mouths.
The two sides are now willing to take that step and break the cycle.
It is
With the vote of Congress secured, it is up to the hawks to gain the popular support of the greater public. To do so, they have a dossier on hand. Remember that dossier from Rome? The one that emerged mysteriously from the archives of the Italian military secret service, SISMI? Enzo Bianco, former Minister of the Interior, has closely followed the extraordinary story of this dossier.
In the Secret Service archives, there are thousands and thousands of documents. There's always a document that can serve a given purpose. At an opportune moment, some foot soldier pulled that file from the shelf and gave it to someone who could use it.
That foot soldier is Rocco Martino, a longtime SISMI agent, informer to French, British, and American secret services. He is the one who circulated the seemingly explosive dossier among his so-called clients. This is it. It contains official-looking documents that allude to a sale by Niger to Iraq of concentrated uranium, or yellow cake. This dossier on Nigerian yellow cake finally lands on the desk of Vice President Cheney in February 2002.
When Dick Cheney saw this report from the Defense Intelligence Agency about yellow cake, the Iraqis seeking yellow cake in darkest Africa, Niger, he asked the CIA briefer, what do you think about this? The CIA briefer said, well, I'll check it out.
And to verify it, the CIA summons Joe Wilson on February 19, 2002.
They asked me to go to Niger. In the meeting, there were two people who said that there was no reason for me to go to Niger because, one, it was highly unlikely that this was true, and two, we had an embassy there that followed the situation very closely. Those two people were the State Department Intelligence and Research Officer and myself.
Wilson is familiar with Niger, fourth largest uranium producer in the world. He was posted there at the beginning of his career as a diplomat.
When I got there, the first person I went to see was the U.S. ambassador. And she said to me, we have already looked at this, and we have determined that there is nothing there.
Wilson returns to the United States and gives his report to the CIA.
The amount of uranium that was being talked about represented about a 25% increase in annual production levels. And any such increase would have had to have been approved through the consortium that ran the mine. You could not hide that.
In fact, yellow cake is transported in the open across hundreds of miles before arriving to the port of Cotonou, from where it is exported. Wilson's conclusions are relayed to Cheney, who ignores them. The vice president is sticking to his dossier from Italy and the revelations inside it. And yet, the Italians gave the Americans fair warning. The documents on Nigerian yellow cake are false. Niccolo Polari, former head of intelligence, was in direct contact with the Americans.
The United States, as I have said, and as it has been established in other investigations in America and in other countries, the United States knew perfectly well what to expect regarding the exact nature of these documents.
So why did foot soldier Martino circulate this dossier? Did he act alone, on his own behalf, or on behalf of other interests? The man who knows the answers is bound to secrecy.
I cannot reveal everything I know on the subject, as I am bound by state secrecy. But we launched an investigation which is still subject to the state secret privilege. The Italian government knows what it concluded, but I cannot talk about it. The law forbids me from doing so.
But that official silence is unacceptable for Enzo Bianco, who has been demanding a commission of inquiry for years.
The fact that there are direct relations between members of Western secret services who are exchanging information is not a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when this familiarity is used to deliberately construct false information. False information that does not correspond to state interests, but rather to other interests.
Doubts, suspicions that the pro-war camp will ignore. For the neoconservatives, the Yellow Cake dossier is a godsend. It fuels a fundamental fear, that of a nuclear apocalypse.
The only weapon of mass destruction that truly is a weapon of mass destruction is a nuclear weapon. Chemical weapons and biological weapons are battlefield weapons, but a nuclear weapon is a society-altering weapon.
Fear of the Iraqi bomb reaches its pinnacle in September 2002. The New York Times, the most influential daily in the United States, publishes a headline about the threat from Baghdad. It alludes to aluminum tubes seized by the Americans that were to be used in the production of centrifuges to enrich uranium from Africa. And finally, to make an atomic bomb. It all adds up. The Hawks respond in rapid succession. Cheney on NBC.
It is now public that he has been seeking to acquire the kinds of tubes that are necessary to build a centrifuge.
Rumsfeld on CBS.
The way one gains absolute certainty as to whether a dictator has a nuclear weapon is if he uses it, and that's a little late.
And Condoleezza Rice utters a little sentence that resonates around the world.
We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
In the United States, the brainwashing works like a charm at the end of 2002. According to the polls, almost 80% of Americans believe Saddam has an atomic bomb or is close to having one. In the end, the Yellow Cake dossier will have a remarkable fate. President Bush himself will get behind it.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
Spoken by the most powerful man in the world, this little sentence is an emphatic condemnation, and yet Bush had been warned.
When the when the State of the Union address was being prepared, the CIA told the White House, you cannot use this claim that Saddam attempted to purchase uranium from Niger.
To proceed despite the CIA's reluctance, the White House attributes these revelations to the British, who spoke of yellow cake in their September report.
With respect to Iraq's attempt to acquire nuclear material in Niger, the British intelligence official, the head of British intelligence at the time, to this day insists that that information was correct. And no one can say with certainty that it isn't true.
In fact, the British white paper was simply circular reporting. It was our story that ended up in a British document. It was the same story.
The French government, which controls the exploitation of the uranium mines, looked into the yellow cake affair and concluded it was fraudulent. Jean-Marc de la Sablière was the diplomatic advisor to French President Jacques Chirac at the time.
I find this yellow cake affair very strange. So do the nuclear experts. Between the acquisition of natural uranium and the enrichment of uranium, you need installations that no longer exist. I find it all extremely strange.
A very diplomatic judgment. But more surprises are in store for Paris and the rest of the world.
UNSCOM estimates that Saddam Hussein could have produced 20.
Early 2003, the American government decides to present its great manipulation to the entire world.
Enough to fill tens upon tens of thousands.
Colin Powell stands before the UN to deliver a scathing indictment of Saddam Hussein. He repeats the accusations already brandished during the debates before Congress. He stresses the existence of mobile laboratories for producing biological weapons. These are the revelations made by Curveball, the Iraqi defector who spoke to German spies. Finally, he accuses Saddam of wanting to get his hands on an atomic bomb. He speaks of the aluminum tubes that for months have been presented as irrefutable proof.
We watched Colin Powell, and we said, whoa, this is, really theatrics, well done. And we gave him an A for presentation and a C- for content.
I remember it well. I was sitting behind Dominique de Villepin, and I said to him, no one in this room believes what Powell is saying, probably not even himself.
The vial that General Powell put in the United Nations, with the head of the CIA behind him, was acquired from a man which they named Curveball. He was with the German intelligence service who introduced him to the Americans, and they took his word. The Americans took his word, and we never knew him.
Curveball, whose real name is Rafid Ahmed al-Janabi, would later admit that he made it all up so he could stay in Germany. Richard Pearl, who had so skillfully defended the idea of going to war, has no problem admitting that many of Powell's allegations were unfounded.
The mobile laboratories that were described in that intelligence report, that turned out to be completely false. There were no mobile laboratories. The aluminum tubes, which could have been part of centrifuges, turned out to be aluminum tubes for launching small rockets.
Colin Powell know he was lying? Yeah, he did. Why did he do it? Because the president told him to do it.
The detour to the UN is simply a way of giving the appearance of international law, much like the return of inspectors to Iraq, who have yet to find weapons of mass destruction. But Washington shamelessly applies an irrefutable logic.
If Saddam Hussein indicates that he has weapons of mass destruction and that he is violating United Nations resolutions, then we will know that Saddam Hussein, again, deceived the world. If he said he doesn't have any, then I think that we will find out whether or not Saddam Hussein is saying something that we believe will be verifiably false.
On principle, France wages one last diplomatic battle. On February 14th at the UN, Dominique de Villepin gives a prophetic speech.
L'usage de la force ne se justifie pas aujourd'hui. Il y a une alternative à la guerre.
And on March 7, 2003, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammed al-Baradei, denounces Bush's lies about the yellow cake from Africa.
Based on thorough analysis, the IAEA has concluded, with the concurrence of outside experts, that these documents, which form the basis for the reports of recent uranium transactions between Iraq and Niger, are in fact not authentic. We have therefore concluded that these specific allegations are unfounded.
Well, we know it was a forgery now, and we know that our country suffered the indignity of the IAEA Director al-Baradei saying before the UN Security Council, it took us a day and a half, our experts, but we looked on the internet and we looked elsewhere. We hired experts and we found out that these documents were not authentic.
In Paris, Jacques Chirac announces that he will veto any resolution in favor of war.
Je le répète, la guerre est toujours la pire des solutions. Quelles que soient les circonstances, la France votera non parce qu'elle considère, ce soir, qu'il n'y a pas lieu de faire une guerre pour atteindre l'objectif que nous nous sommes fixés, c'est-à-dire le désarmement de l'Irak.
The Americans will ignore the advice of Chirac, the conclusions of Baradei, and the opinion of the UN. The night of March 19th, the war begins. 3 weeks later, columns of American tanks roll into Baghdad. Whoa! Saddam Hussein flees. From the outset of the operation in Iraq, American soldiers search for Saddam Hussein's arsenal. They find nothing. The Hawks say it is the spies' fault.
You know, intelligence agencies frequently make mistakes. Intelligence organizations, by their very nature, are working with imperfect information, with conflicting accounts, with things that it's impossible to interpret with a high degree of certainty.
The CIA, which had been so suspicious of the collaboration between the exiles and the Pentagon, will be forced to take the blame. Most notably for the worst lies. That little sentence, 16 words in all, spoken by Bush about the African yellow cake and the documents that inspired it.
No one knew at the time in our circles. Maybe someone knew down in the bowels of the agency, but no one in our circles knew that there were doubts and suspicions that this might be a forgery.
This insistence on defending the official lie finally gets the better of Joe Wilson's discretion.
It was at that time that I fully understood that the government was not going to admit that it had lied to the American people, and therefore I had to write the story myself.
In the New York Times, he publishes the truth about his mission to Niger and the fact that the White House was well aware of his conclusions.
Given the structure of the consortiums that operated the mines, it would be exceedingly difficult for Niger to transfer uranium to Iraq.
The CIA must once again shoulder responsibility, and George Tenet releases a statement.
These 16 words should have never been included in the text written for the president. This was a mistake.
A meager mea culpa for a lethal lie. At the White House, the issue becomes a topic of jokes. Ari Fleischer, the president's press secretary, celebrates his final briefing. The journalists offer him a cake. One of them jokes,
"We have a little something for you. We've received assurances that it's not yellow cake."
And Fleischer executes his final about-face.
Well, if it is, I'm sure we'll find it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Goyle. Thank you.
Official inquiries will denounce the incompetence of the intelligence community for the erroneous information about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. But the truth is that the hawks of Washington knowingly lied.
This was fraud, and I can't say that often enough. No mistake, fraud.
The man who was complicit in this manipulation refuses to be held solely responsible.
To believe that an exile organization with limited means can fool a major superpower, the only superpower in the world at the time, with tens of billions of dollars on sophisticated intelligence gathering into war against Saddam is fictional.
It will be 3 years before Bush admits that he deceived Americans and the world.
The main reason we went into Iraq at the time was we thought he had weapons of mass destruction. It turns out he didn't, but he had the capacity to make weapons of mass destruction. But I also talked about the human suffering in Iraq.
Bush brushes aside the stated reason for a war that has destroyed an entire country. In Iraq, the easy invasion turns into a bloody occupation.
The downward spiral started with the occupation. The coalition, especially the Americans, lost the moral high ground, and they became the jailers of the Iraqi people.
The bedlam, the chaos, the violence in Iraq now is a natural consequence of what Bush and Cheney did in invading Iraq.
Iraq is quickly ripped to shreds, torn apart by religious and ethnic violence, a planned demolition.
I think the most convincing argument was that in order to enhance Israel's position in the Middle East and its security, the nations surrounding it that formed an anti-Israeli bloc had to be broken up into smaller, confessionally homogeneous nation states. So in the case of Iraq, a Kurdistan, a Shiistan, and a Sunnistan.
This objective was openly declared as early as 1996 by the neoconservatives in this document, signed by Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith, a text that accuses Iraq of posing a threat to Israel. Today, the chaos in Iraq has claimed Syria. Entire provinces are beyond the control of Baghdad and Damascus. There, terrorist groups rule supreme, and the West has found itself a new enemy, the head of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
The United States bears considerable responsibility for the fact that the Islamic State exists, but not because the United States intended to create the Islamic State, rather that the Islamic State came into existence as an unintended consequence of this immensely foolish war.
The Americans and the British, had they not occupied the country, had they curbed corruption when it started, we would not have Daesh.
The violence has claimed hundreds of thousands of victims, dead, wounded, maimed, and has uprooted millions of Iraqis and Syrians.
You have hundreds of thousands of refugees leaving the area, and nobody asks, what caused this? What caused this terrible human catastrophe? It wasn't an earthquake, it wasn't a typhoon, it was an invasion of a country that was reasonably intact when we invaded it.
The Iraqi manipulation has come at a heavy price to America, $3 trillion. This public money has made the defense industry rich.
Peace is bad for business. War, tension is always very good for business. So money, of course, was a major factor.
So the United States finds itself today essentially engaged in permanent war. And it's a permanent war that benefits some people. There are some people and some entities that are making a lot of money from this endless war.
Profits rarely mentioned, relegated to silence, as are the Americans who have died in Iraq, like the son of Andrew Basevich, killed May 13, 2007. An anonymous section of Arlington National Cemetery is reserved for them.
I think one of the saddest aspects of our Iraq war is how quickly Americans have chosen to forget it. There seems to be an unwillingness on the part of the American people to acknowledge and to confront this enormous failure.
Aggressive deception is totally incompatible with the fundamental principle of democracy.
A failure, the result of a manipulation that has shaken the confidence of Americans in their own institutions. The man who wanted to see the end of Saddam Hussein did not want to see the end of Iraq, and he was sidelined.
An emissary of President Bush told me, if you oppose the policies of President Bush, we will bring the full weight of the United States to bear against you. I knew that the Americans are going to target me. There is a finding of the National Security Council signed by President Bush in April of 2004 entitled Marginalized Chalabi.
10 hours after this interview, Ahmed Chalabi was found dead in his bed. An autopsy concluded it was a heart attack. Saddam Hussein, arrested and judged, is hung December 13, 2006. George Bush is re-elected in November 2004. Richard Cheney remains vice president. Colin Powell leaves office in January 2005. Condoleezza Rice replaces him at the State Department. George Tenet resigns in July 2004, citing personal reasons. Douglas Feith resigns from the Pentagon in January 2005. Paul Wolfowitz is appointed president of the World Bank in June 2005. Donald Rumsfeld leaves the Pentagon in November 2006 under pressure of generals. Richard Pearl divides his time between Washington and the south of France.